Good afternoon. It's Jim Clemmer. Welcome to our webinar. And Melanie and I are delighted to have you join us. We're going to be taking a pretty fast-paced run through building leadership strengths and culture using Laurier as a great case study, a great example of some of the basic principles that draw from original bit of work from the extraordinary leader that touch a little bit on the extraordinary coach, not so much, but very much drawing from how to be exceptional. So it's going to be a bit of a skip across the icebergs over this next few minutes, actually just under an hour, and then we're going to give you some bonus time for any questions that you might have, which on your control panel you see the chat box area. So as we're going along, please add in any questions there, and then Melanie and I will be happy to take those from you at that point. So let's take a quick look at a little bit of the icebergs that we're going to be jumping across here. The first one is looking at the need for development. I'll make a few comments about that, and then at the end of each one of these sections, we've kind of divided things up where I'll do a little bit of introduction, a bit of a quick overview of a concept, and then Melanie will come in and put a lot more meat on that with a specific example case study at Wilfrid Laurier University. So we'll talk about the need for development. We'll get into a little bit of what are some of the key competencies and some of the research that's showing which competencies produce the most measurable results. We'll talk about some of the steps towards building leadership strengths. And of course, Melanie will talk about how that then works at Laurier. And we'll look then as well, this is a strength-based 360 that the extraordinary leader is built around. So I'll give you a quick overview of some of the key components of that 360, and again, how Laurier has been using it. And then one of the very key elements to building leadership strengths is cross-training. It's quite a new and different way to building strengths, in many ways counterintuitive. And again, I think you'll find it very instructive to get some of the experiences from Laurier. We'll look then at a especially unique process that Laurier has been using that goes above and beyond and extends further some of the concepts from the extraordinary leader. And then we'll wrap up with some final reflections, key learnings that have emerged. And then, as I said, a little bonus session here for whoever wants to hang on for further questions, discussions. Please put those in the chat section of the control panel. So a couple of quick opening thoughts and then get things over to Melanie. So looking first of all at the need for development. Just a few quick stats here. These stats come from a variety of different sources, primarily through Zenger-Folkman research. But one first we'll start with here is that a lot of executives these days really feel that their organization lacks bench strength, especially when you start to look out a few years at the huge retirement wave that many organizations are facing. 97% report serious leadership gaps, and 40% say those are severe. So that's some pretty big gaps. 60 to 75%, this is the retirement wave, are going to be eligible to retire in the next 5 years, which is a pretty significant number of key leaders. And as we continue on, we see one major study that was done, over 6,000 executives were included in this study, looked at how important is leadership? Well, as you might expect, many said it's very important, but look at that second number. Only 7% thought that their organization was doing it effectively. Pretty huge gulf there between those two numbers. 60% of leaders face leadership shortages that they feel impede their performance, and 31% say developing leaders is their largest talent and the issue. So that's kind of general background. At this point, I'll turn things over to Melanie to talk more specifically about Laurier's need for leadership culture and development. And of course, Melanie has been working with us now for, I guess, about 2 years, and 2 years and a bit. She's one of the few in Canada certified facilitators for the extraordinary leader. And as you'll hear, and as she unfolds the story, she's done quite a bit of work within Laurier with the extraordinary leader. Melanie and I actually go back, way back. I think I did some work at Laurier many, many years ago when she was a student there. So that does take us back a few years. So we're delighted to have Melanie joining us here and talking about the great work that they're doing at Laurier.
This is Melanie. I'm really excited to be joining you this afternoon to be talking a little bit about Laurier's experience with the Extraordinary Leader Program and our focus on leadership development. Back almost 8 years now, we had a new president who started, and we went through a process to re-envision Laurier and think about our mission, vision, and values, and really try to define what does that mean for our employees. And when we took a step back even further, and we saw from our senior leaders a strong desire and a real need to invest in the development of leaders. As many organizations that probably many of you work at, we saw significant growth in our management population, and historically we had done very, very little to invest in our leadership population. And so that led to a focus from the institution of focusing on leadership. So for this process, we, myself in my role in organizational development, met with all our senior leaders, did one-on-one interviews. I'd be happy to share that process and the questions that we used to do our needs analysis with anybody who's interested. We also really wanted to engage leaders. So we did 2 different World Cafes with all leaders, positional leaders at the institution, to say, what does leadership development look like to you, and what are you looking for in terms of this? We also knew that we wanted to include a 360 in the process, but we also knew there was some history and some hesitation around including a 360. So again, we consulted with leaders, and this really was to get some buy-in into the process and into what we were hoping to accomplish. And this is what this process landed us on the Extraordinary Leader Program, and that's how Jim Clemmer and I connected. And we developed a program that we really wanted it to be engaging. So we wanted to engage leaders, to inspire lives of leadership and purpose. So again, to connect to our organizational vision. And we really wanted to build capacity, create networks, and enhance the skills of our leaders with the ultimate goal of being as strong as we could be as an institution. And we really wanted to use a strengths-based approach, and this wasn't how we originally started, but the more research we did and the more we talked to folks about leadership development and what they wanted, we really knew that leadership, a strengths-based approach was what people were really interested in. I wanted to give you at the very beginning a highlight or high-level overview of what we did in the program and how we structured it. One thing I will say is we used a cascading top-down approach, and the Extraordinary Leader Program has a lot of involvement of your manager, and so we really wanted it to be something that started at the top. So our president and our VPs went through the program first, and then we cascaded down from there. And the way we broke down the program is we started it with, first we had Jim Clemmer come and speak at a leadership communication meeting where we wanted to set the stage for strengths-based leadership. A lot of what he's going to talk about in the webinar today is what we spoke to during that session. And then we structured it around cohorts. So each cohort participated in a half-day introduction workshop. This is what the Extraordinary Leader Program is all about. This is why strengths-based is important. And really it was to help prepare people to get the most out of the 360 process. We then allowed each cohort 4 weeks to complete that process, and it's very simple, very well laid out, and very easy for the user to get that done. And then we had a results debrief, and this is really the most important piece of it, where people get their 360 results the day before. We chose to email it to them the day before, so they had time ahead of time to review their report and figure out, you know, what are the messages that are being sent through my 360 feedback, and then they came together the very next day. We didn't want people to have it a week before the session because we didn't want people to stew about what they had heard. So this results debrief is really about understanding what is it that I'm hearing in this report and what are my strengths, and is there anything I need to focus on because it's so glaring that I need to address that first, which is coined a fatal flaw, which you will hear Jim talk about later. The other thing that we did to add to the Extraordinary Leader Program is we added in a one-on-one coaching meeting with myself through the process. This isn't something we did right at the very beginning, but after people get their 360, after they came to the results debrief, I met with everyone one-on-one. And this was really an opportunity to answer questions. So people would say things like, my peers were really hard on me and not sure what to do about that, or my direct report said this and I'm really uncomfortable with what they said. I don't know how to address it. So it was a lot of one-on-one coaching through the process of receiving 360 feedback. The other thing, as Jim mentioned earlier, that we did that is a bit unique and I think was really really contributed significantly to the success of this program at Laurier was that we developed 3 what we call taking action modules, which is really an opportunity for people to think about and continue to focus on their development planning. And I will speak to that a little bit later as we transition. Throughout the slides, I'll talk more about the content that we covered in the taking action modules. I'm going to turn it back over to Jim.
So thanks a lot, Melanie. I really appreciate that quick overview and showing some of where Laurier started from and also give you a bit of a preview of where they went, and then she'll continue on with that. This next section, I'm going to go through pretty quickly. There's a lot more material on our website in those books that I mentioned. We're going to send you a follow-up email with some links. So there's a lot of the data and the research that we have tremendous amounts of that I'll go through here just in a real quick overview. So it's really looking at what are the key competencies that produce measurable results. And this is the beginning point of all of this work. Way back in 12, 14 years ago, Joe Falkman, Jack Zenger started off with the idea of, can we figure out how to link leadership to organizational outcomes like engagement, retention, profitability, sales, safety? There's a long list of outcomes. And by making those linkages, we can figure out what separates the best leaders from the worst leaders, the bottom 10% from the top 10%. And those were then called differentiating competencies. So it turned out that there were 16 that really made that cut out of the original few dozen. There were 70 or 80 originally in the data set. And so the research, the original research, was 2 years of that kind of work, looking at over 200,000 360s that have been done on 20,000 leaders. That data set is now 3 times that size and gets recalibrated each year, and we continue to see pretty much the same trends. There's a bit of shifts, but it doesn't change very much. So in looking at the top and the bottom 10%, what it showed is that A, we can make strong measurable connections between these competencies and performance outcomes, and we can identify these 16, which you're going to see as we go along. Doesn't mean we have to be good at all 16, but they present a bit of a menu for a leader to draw from and build from. And then we also see very clearly, and we're going to see as we go along, how building strengths is key to really making that kind of impact. So I'll show you the 16. I'll show you a little of the data, but then I want to get you back to Melanie as to how Laurier has approached this. So there's 3 competencies that we've grouped under the heading of results, focusing on results. The center competency is character. There's a tent pole kind of model that we use with a center tent pole and 4 around the outside corners. And so that center is character. And then we see leading change, especially these days it seems, is a very, very important skill set. And then we see 5 here under what you might think of as emotional intelligence skills, or sometimes they're called the soft skills. But there really are a key set of skills there, and interpersonal. And then lastly, we have this category of personal capability, which includes a bit of a mixture, as you see, of somewhat softer things like innovation and perhaps self-development, and harder kinds of things like technical professional expertise. So the next series of slides are really showing how there's correlations then between, for example, very poor leaders have a lot more employees thinking about quitting, through to the very best leaders that have far fewer employees thinking about quitting. We put an iceberg in the background because, of course, the big problem isn't people that quit and leave, although that can be a real problem in turnover, but it's often people that quit and stay. And so this is showing the correlation now between engagement levels and employee satisfaction with leadership. And we see similar with one of the questions for engagement is asking, is this a place where people want to go the extra mile? Anybody who scored a 5 out of 5, here's what we see, is that very poor leaders had few people scoring a 5 out of 5. Remarkably, there were still 10% that did, even though they had really bad leaders. Says something about basic human nature, I think. Some people will still give it their all, even when they have bad leaders. And then we have more in the middle, and towards the end, we see sharp difference, especially in the 90th percentile, which, by the way, is how we define extraordinary leader, somebody who's in the top 10% of leadership or in the 90th percentile. So we see similar patterns with pay and job performance. And look at the stark differences there. Way off at the left, you couldn't pay me enough to work for that leader. There isn't enough money in the world that's worth doing that. And over at the extreme right, wow, and I get paid for working here too. This is a great place to work, and I love to be part of this team. We see the similar trends with customer satisfaction. We see it carrying on with sales, same kinds of trends. There's a white paper that we have available called How Extraordinary Leaders Double Profits, and it's particularly focusing on a good leader at the middle 80% versus a great leader, the kind of impact that has. And any of you concerned about safety, we have a lot of data showing that a strong leader, an extraordinary leader, has a 3.5 times safer workplace than a very poor leader. So I went very quickly through these statistics, and as I said, we've got lots more of this stuff, and it's available on our website, and we'll in our follow-up email, we'll send you more connections to some of those statistics. But that's how the competencies were developed, and some of those connections were made, and I'll turn things back over to Melanie now.
Hello again, everyone. I know our folks in our health and safety office were very happy with the last slide that Jim spoke to in terms of it being on the radar, in terms of the connection between effective leadership and safety. So a couple of thoughts for us at Laurier about the competencies and the results. And when we were finished the program and we had around 170 leaders participate in the program, our results very much followed the Zinger-Folkman norms. And before we even started the program, all the data that Jim presented, I think, really sets the stage for leaders to say, wow, focusing on my leadership development and going from being good to extraordinary has a significant impact on so many different things. And when we received our aggregate reporting at the end, it really gave us a great picture of our leadership landscape. So where is our bench strength? Who are our extraordinary leaders? What, as an organization, do we have strength in? How can we capitalize on those strengths to make sure that we are using or aligning people's strengths with the goals and objectives of the institution? The other thing I think that is really helpful is that it provides a great conversation starter with our senior leaders and our managers to say, look at us as an institution or as an organization, and look at how these competencies that are outlined in the extraordinary leader align to our competency model, our employee success factors, as well as who we are and what we value as an organization. So I think the competencies that are identified and the data that gets presented through this program is really, really helpful and something that can be really impactful in terms of outcomes within the organization. I'm going to turn it back over to Jim, and he's going to spend some time talking about building leadership strengths.
All right, terrific. Thanks, Melanie. We are skipping over the icebergs here, and the challenge is I want to make sure that we get lots of time for Laurier's experiences and don't spend as much time on the concepts. So this next section on building leadership strengths, we will again connect you to a white paper that talks about the impact of strength building. It is very powerful, as we'll give you a quick taste of here. First, a comment from Yale University. Part of the reason I put this in here is because we had connected with Yale when Laurier first started down this path. And so we see Michael Peel here talking about their experiences with the importance of focusing on strengths. So the basic dilemma is that when we look at a typical 360 or we get feedback for a leader on how to improve across, say, all those 16 competencies, if we get this kind of output where the individual is pretty good at everything, then what do we focus on? We'll focusing a couple of the weaker areas really make that much difference. And we're going to see that, no, it really won't. There is one exception to building strengths, and it sounds like a harsh term, but we use the term fatal flaw. Not to say, I always remind participants that it doesn't mean you're flawed. It doesn't mean anything about your character or judging you. It's saying that your leadership behavior has something in it which is really causing a problem. Some people do call it significant weakness, career derailers. It has different terms. We use the term fatal flaw to really delineate something that isn't just a weakness. It's more than just a weakness. We all have weaknesses. It's something that's really critical to that individual's effectiveness. And when that shows up, we see here that anybody with a fatal flaw is typically at the 18th percentile or lower in overall leadership assessment, leadership strength. So the idea of leadership perceptions says, well, in an ideal world, we would be objectively evaluated across all the different competencies, all the different skills in an even-handed way. But of course, what really happens is something or other stands out. So one trait either inflates and brings up all the others, something that in psychology circles has been called confirmation bias, because we look for something to strengthen, or if something really stands out as a potential fatal flaw, then it shrinks everything else. And so that has a lot of different implications to it. One of the implications is we don't have to be good at everything in order to be an extraordinary leader. And in fact, this data shows that, back to our earlier chart, where somebody's just kind of average across everything, no fatal flaws, no profound strengths, they're going to actually be at the 34th percentile, almost at the bottom third, which is not very good. But if they take any one of those 16 competencies to the 90th percentile, look at the jump. Almost double. If it goes to take two of those up there, we're almost to the top quartile. Now we're up over 80 percentile, and on, so that around 4 or 5 strengths takes us to extraordinary leadership. And that has all kinds of implications. One of the things that comes out of this work is that we then have done pre-post testing of individuals who have gone through this process. Maybe 18, 24 months later, they've been reassessed by people around them. And those who focused on fixing weaknesses, good news is there was improvement. They saw change. But what's even more intriguing and even better news is those who focused on building strengths saw 2 to sometimes 3 times more improvement as seen by everybody else around them. And so that can take us in. I know Melanie is going to touch very briefly on where Laurier is at now, going down the sort of road that Mary Settle here, who's been a Zenger-Folkman client for a number of years, in this comment, she talks about how this has really caused them to rethink their whole performance management philosophy and looking at how to build strengths. And anybody here is familiar with the positive psychology movement that's come out of the University of Pennsylvania. There's some recent research there showing the very same thing, that helping employees build strengths is dramatically more engaging and really helps to improve pretty remarkably the overall energy that people have for the performance management process. And a lot of companies can say that. So back over to Melanie.
What we thought we would do now is spend some time looking at the impact of the whole Extraordinary Leader program, as well as focusing on strengths here at Laurier. And so I'm going to present some of the data that we received after, in a post-participation survey that we conducted. And so one thing that was really surprising to me was that 65% of our participants have never participated in the 360 prior to our leadership development program. So to me, this reinforces the need to prep people for what it's like to receive 360 feedback. Really, really important. The other thing I will say is that when we started out down this journey of focusing on leadership development, we had great debates at our institution about including the 360 or not. And you'll see from what's presented on the slide that over 80% of our participants indicated that the 360 assessment was one of the most valuable components, which speaks to the value of making sure you're including that. The other thing I'll mention is 90% of our folks were focused on developing a strength as opposed to working on a fatal flaw. And I know Jim talked about the term fatal flaw, and we were one of those organizations that said, should we call it a fatal flaw? Should we call it a significant weakness? And we had lots of debates around that. But at the end of the day, it is what it is, and call it what it is. And even those 10% who were working on a fatal flaw still found huge value in the program. The other couple of things, 98% indicated increased self-awareness, and I think that only comes from a 360. And another piece that was really helpful for us to see was that 93% felt they walked away with increased capacity as a leader. And for any of you who are working in leadership development, you know that's something to be proud of and something that this program really provides. The other thing we wanted to talk about is that the impact of building strengths at Laurier is really starting to slowly shift the culture at our organization to a strengths-based. And one of the challenges is that not everybody's going to understand or buy into this strengths-based approach. And I would say 1/3 of the people get it right away, and they think, this is fantastic, this is empowering, I love this. Another third, after participating and learning more about it, think, yeah, you know what, I understand the business case for this. I understand why this could be valuable. And there'll be another third you have to work a lot harder to get them to convince. But overall, I would say that we are slowly starting to see a shift in our organization towards focusing on not what's broken and what's not working, but let's look at what's working first. And so we've added a strengths-based approach to our performance management. We've created a lot of work around appreciative inquiry that aligns really well with strengths-based approaches, and we're really trying to embed it into our culture and focusing on that. I'm going to pass it over to Jim to give us a little bit more about the program, and you'll hear from me shortly.
All right. Well, thank you, Melanie. Wow, Melanie's a real pro here, able to just roll with our technical glitches. Well, again, we're covering a lot of territory in a short period of time, which is always in these kinds of sessions we make that decision that we want to go fairly broad and give you a broad overview rather than going deep in any one component. And I do encourage you, if you have questions as we're going along, put them into the chat section of your panel. You'll see it says type message here. So just go ahead and put those in there, and then Melanie and I will try to get to them either at the end here or in any follow-up with you. So we'll look very briefly at critical components of the strengths-based 360 assessment. Again, we'll send you a link to more background on this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each point, just giving you this broad overview to say that where this began was primarily the 360 was developed by Joe Folkman, who did his PhD in 360s way back when and has a tremendous depth and experience over decades working with 360 tools. And so the first part of this we've already spoken to, which is what's very different about this approach is focusing on strengths and not focusing on weaknesses, which is typically what a lot of 360s tend to do. And so the second part of that, or the next piece of this, is making sure that we're measuring the kinds of things that really matter. And so here we're saying that a lot of 360s, sometimes they're homemade, homegrown, they don't really have a lot of reliability, validity behind them, or sometimes we've seen some where survey questions haven't been well designed and people actually get a little bit confused with them. We then look at the rating scale itself. I'm just going to zip through a quick example here. A typical 360 will use a 5-point scale like this, a Likert scale. So someone is asked, well, do they listen carefully, attentively? And they'll say, yeah, that person, my manager, whomever, does a pretty good job. I'll give them a 4. Whereas, and so the manager gets that information and says, hey, I'm 80%. That's not too bad. Whereas our scale is a strengths-based scale that looks more like this. And so now someone looks at that and says, well, okay, they're doing okay. I'll maybe give that a 3. So now they're competent. Now, at first that seems to be kind of penalizing somebody, but what it does is it makes the data clearer because it delineates a broader spread there. Is this truly a strength, or is it just okay, or is it a profound strength? So we get a much greater clarity around the data. Many of you who have used surveys over the years probably know they often bunch up around 4, and you have difficulty really delineating the data. So it does decrease the overall response, but it makes it a lot clearer. So we look as well at normative averages. Now, one of the examples we use in the program is Richard's case study. And so here's Richard's survey data. And you look at this and you say, well, he's kind of okay in some and not so good in others. He should maybe focus on bringing up those weaker areas. So we have a lot of discussion about that. And then we go on to say, well, as Michelangelo said years ago, our great tragedy is not that we aim too high and we miss it. It's that we aim too low and we reach it. So we're trying to get to extraordinary here. So now if we show Richard's data with the 90th percentile, it starts to produce quite a bit of a different picture. And you start to realize, you know, he's not too far away from a few things there at the 90th already. And if you were to improve just the weaker areas, that probably wouldn't do much for him. But if you were to take those up to the 90th, as we saw earlier, he could have a major impact. So as well, what's built into this program, and I know Melanie will speak a little bit to some of the aggregated data as well, is the idea of getting some employee satisfaction or feedback. There are 5 questions that become a mini engagement survey. So here are the 5 questions, and these are only direct reports that complete these. And so what that gives then, and this, by the way, is correlated to some of the top engagement surveys around in the industry today. So now I get feedback like this that shows me, as a leader, where I'm at with these 5 questions from my direct reports. And so it starts to really personalize to me what the engagement survey or questions might be. Here's one of the other areas that's really critical, and I know Melanie will speak to this as well, is because we're saying you don't have to be good at all these competencies. Well, which ones should I be good at? Well, part of our report helps you sort that out. It gives you feedback to be able to identify. The yellow bars are the individuals saying these are the top 4. Everybody's asked which 4 are most important to this person in their role. So the yellow bars, well, that's the individual saying there's his or her pick of the top 4. And then we see the manager, we see peers, we see direct reports. And we can now begin to identify, are these things that are really critical? And it helps us to identify as well, is this a fatal flaw or not? So that in this case, we say that, yeah, that top one is probably a fatal flaw because it's got a lower score, 3, anything below 3.4, we start to flag as a potential fatal flaw, and it's important. Now, if it was down at the bottom of the list and nobody had chose it as being that important, it's not really a fatal flaw, it's just a weaker area. So this helps us to start to really customize the report right down to the individual. So we'll just take a look then at written comments, focus on reinforcing strengths. We don't have a question that asks, what are this person's weaknesses? The question simply asks, does this person have a fatal flaw? That's really about all it is that we want to know. And so getting insights on how to build strengths starts to become a key part of this, as well as you see overall, it's quite a simple, straightforward process that makes it a lot easier to digest. So again, I want to get this over to Melanie to fill in with examples of Laurier.
Hello again, everyone. So one of the things that I really found as leading this program and facilitating all of the workshops that people participated in is this feeling of being able to let go of the weaknesses. And so for those 90% of people who participated in the program who don't have a fatal flaw, being able to say, you know what, it doesn't matter if I take a ton of initiative. That's not important to my role. My manager says I don't, hasn't said I need to be good at that. And it's one of my lower scores, I can let that go. And when you can focus on something that is a strength, people had way more energy, or my experience in witnessing people working on their development plan is they have way more energy and excitement about coming up with some actions, tangible actions that they can do to strengthen their leadership. Again, some people participated in this shift, and in those one-on-one meetings that I talked about earlier, I often had to spend time convincing people, no, you're getting sucked into the weaknesses again. This program is strengths-based, and nobody has said that those 3 areas that you got your lowest score in are important to your role. So forget about them. Let them go and focus on what it is that you're good at. And I will say, too, the people who do have fatal flaws, the way the program is structured, it's very motivating and inspiring. And it's not punitive if you have a fatal flaw. It's presented as, here's an opportunity. Wouldn't you rather know that this is hanging over you and affecting your leadership capability? And here's some really tangible things you can do to help that be eliminated as a fatal flaw and focus on what those strengths absolutely are. So I will say that it really did resonate with people, the strengths-based, and the importance ratings, that slide that Jim showed with the yellow bars, critically important and very different from what you will see in a lot of other 360 programs, in that it really factors in what is important to you in your role. For you to be the most successful you can be in this role, what is it that you need to be good at? And that creates a really good opportunity for dialogue between the leader and their supervisor, and between the leader and their direct reports. And it's an excellent tool that really helps focus that development planning. Jim's going to talk now about cross-training, and this was another hugely critical, important piece of the program that we found at Laurier.
All right. Thanks very much, Melanie. Yeah, we'll skip on over to the next iceberg now. This is another one that has a tremendous depth to it. We're just going to be hitting the top of it here. So cross-training is where there's a very clear difference from many, many approaches to development, because how do you build a strength? And so one of the first components is deciding what to work on. And so that is a combination of three things. Getting my feedback, knowing what my 4, 5, or 6 top strengths are. So that's the starting point. So my competence, where am I strong? And then, as we've just talked about, and Melanie reinforced, the idea of organizational needs, getting feedback on which are most important to my role. And then there's a third component that's rarely factored in, but is so critical ultimately to how people stay with development and really make this work. And that's the whole area of passion. So giving participants time to think through, what am I passionate about? What do I love to do? Which of these skills, competencies really get me going and engage me? And so those three together are what we think of as the leadership sweet spot. So the first thing we're trying to do is to help participants identify what some of their sweet spots are so that they can take a couple of competencies up much higher from good to great. So how do you do that? Well, cross-training comes out of the world of athletics, the term. Of course, it's been used there for decades. And if you take a typical example, someone that wants to be an outstanding long-distance runner, maybe go to the Olympics, what would you tell them? Just go out and run more? Well, that would be a linear approach. Just train harder, try hard, more, just get you more motivated. Well, no, they could actually injure themselves doing that, and they may not actually get to the top level. So instead, of course, an athlete might do these kinds of things: cross-training, mental, physical, diet, etc. And so when we look at development and building strengths, it starts to become a similar line of thinking. So for example, someone that gets feedback that says, well, you're at about the 70th, 80th percentile in honesty and integrity, might be a little puzzled. I might say, well, but I don't lie, cheat, or steal. I'm a straight arrow, honest person. Well, how do I go from good to great? How do I always be honest, make that my motto? Do I just never lie, be really, really honest? Like, what do I do to get up to the 90th percentile? And so what Zenger-Folkman did was, when you start to think about it, it makes a lot of sense. A little reverse engineering. Looking at everybody in the database who currently is at the 90th percentile on honesty and integrity, and just pulling out that group of people, whatever that number is, maybe it's a few hundred people, and then cross-correlating what else shows up as being very high consistently enough that we know there's some kind of connection here. Now, correlation isn't always causation. We don't necessarily know which causes which, but we know that they're strongly connected together. And so that then starts to form a path for us. So, for example, the highest correlation turns out to be assertiveness, speaking up, putting your ideas forward, living your values in an active kind of way, and so on around. We start to see these other connections. And so this becomes a bit of a roadmap that we can draw from to start to decide, well, what is it that I'm going to work on in order to improve my honesty and integrity? Or here's another example. This is actually straight out of the workbook. Communication, this one is for inspiring others to change. So it's looking at what are some of the cross connections around inspiring others to change. So in the workbook then there's more detail that goes deeper into any one of these that we might choose. And so we encourage you to choose one or two of these little cross competencies, as they're called, and drill down and build those a little bit further. So one last comment that I'll just add here is at Queen's, Alan Harrison, Provost there, has been through this process now over the last year and a half and through a number of coaching sessions, and was reflecting a while ago on just how effective it was, and we asked him if he could give us just a reflection or a comment, and so he gave this to us to say that it really has been a very effective process for him, and especially he was zeroing in on this section that we're just looking at, that he found this cross-companion development guide really gave him a lot more clarity around building particular strengths, and it was a lot better. He'd been through a lot of 360s in the past and found that this was a much more effective way of doing it, and he wished he had done this years ago. So we'll now turn things back over to Melanie to talk more about how Laurier is using this part of the program.
I will reiterate what Jim has said around the cross-training being such a critical component of the Extraordinary Leader Program. And when I look at Laurier and what we've done, it really provides a great framework. And I always love when I'm facilitating the results debrief where people are going through and identifying their leadership sweet spot and those sort of blank looks that you get when people think, okay, I'm already good at leading change and now I need to become even better at it. What am I actually going to do? And then you show them the cross-training materials and they go, oh, this makes sense now. I know exactly what I'm going to do. And the other thing that I will say is that a lot of participants kept saying to me, but this feels so easy. Like, it's what I love, it's what I need to be good at, and it is what I'm already kind of good at. This just feels really easy. And my response to that is always that, and then you've got it right. And if I think about my own development planning when I participated, 3.5 years ago, the competency I was to focus on was developing others. And my role is organizational development and leading a leadership program, and it completely aligns. It's part of my passion. It's what I need to be good at. And so it felt easy. And what you'll see on the slide there, people are too busy for difficult. They don't have time to create a whole development plan that's outside of their job and not connected to what they're actually doing. And so in this program, those leadership sweet spots just really hit home with people that this doesn't have to be something different, and this can be aligned with who you are and what you love to do. And then people are way more motivated to actually do something with the feedback and act on their results and act on going from being that good leader to being that extraordinary leader. So we got one more section here that Jim's going to talk about, and then I'll share a bit about the taking action modules and some reflections. Here you go.
Okay, terrific. Thanks, Melanie. Again, I remind you, if you have any sorts of questions you want Melanie and I to address, just type them into the chat area. All right, so last piece then is, of course, the all-important area of following through and how we continue this on. And in this case, we've added in this term peer coaching. Because as I mentioned before, this is where I think Laurier has been doing some pretty innovative things in building on further to the Extraordinary Leader Program. So first, a few quick bits of research. Follow-up is obviously critical. Probably very few people on this call would disagree with that. But here's just how critical Zenger-Folkman has found it to be, that if the participant doesn't do something with the development plan or whatever it is that they've learned from their 360 and some of the work that they want to put in, if it's not done within about 30 days, chances that it's going to be done really drop off a cliff. Which, of course, when you think about it, if you don't do something within about a month, you're not likely to circle back later and do a lot with it. So you really need to do something pretty soon. And this is also corroborated with some of this research from Marshall Goldsmith and one of his colleagues, where they're looking here at 11,000 managers where there was no follow-up. We see how things fall off over the next couple of months. As to when there was consistent follow-up, we see a dramatic difference, that it actually increases over the next couple of months and it becomes a building sort of process, which again, we know is often the case. So I'm going to switch things back over to Melanie now to talk about just how they built these taking action modules.
One of the things that we found as participants, as people driving this program, when we participated, is at the end of the full day or half day, however it is structured, you walk away with a lot of insights and a lot of knowledge from your 360, but it takes a lot of time for people to digest and wrap their head around the cross-training and the companion behaviors and all of the concepts. And we really didn't want to invest all this money in a program and then have people go back to their offices and that's the end and never think about it again. So we developed 4 pieces that connect to the program, and we called them taking action modules. So after the results debrief, after they met with me in a coaching role or a coaching meeting, one-on-one, every 6 weeks for 3 rounds, we met again. And we wanted to really focus the taking action modules on 3 key elements. So the first one was focused on, okay, how does this competency that I'm trying to strengthen connect to the work that I do? So we had people use an appreciative inquiry approach to interview, through a paired interview, identify what are my key goals and objectives, what are the key priority areas and where do I have the biggest opportunity for impact, and how can I use my competency to help me achieve this goal? And so we all have goals and objectives that we set every year, but we may not be very intentional about how we use our strengths to achieve those goals. So that's what the first Taking Action module was. Each of these modules were half a day and with the same group of people. So ours were in cohorts, so the same 20 people participated in everything together, which again really builds that peer coaching, accountability, partnership, all of those elements into the approach. The second Taking Action module, we took it sort of a step higher and said, okay, you as a leader are leading a team or have people that you need to influence for those people who don't lead a team. And we focused in on inspiring and motivating others to high performance and had people set some actions and follow up around that competency. As Zenger-Folkman has found, that competency correlates the most directly or most strongly with employee engagement. And that was a really interesting, those were really interesting conversations. And we also built into that module just a very introductory discussion of your role as a leader, as a coach. And the Extraordinary Coach program is a whole separate program or connected program to the Extraordinary Leader. So we used just very high-level introductory thoughts around that. The third Taking Action module, take it a step even higher, and we said, okay, what's going on at our organization right now? What are all the touch points, hot topics, issues, challenges, things that are going on at the organization? And so we listed those as a group and said, which one of these is impacting you the most specifically in your leadership role and in your role within the organization? So let's say, for example, the constant change or restructuring that's happening in a department. If my strength is around leading change, how can I use my strength of leading change to help me navigate the situation of the restructuring that's happening in our office? And so that was the focus of the third one. And then we also included a 3-month follow-up after that. And again, the reason we built this whole Taking Action these Taking Action modules was really that follow-up. And I think that's where we saw the conversations and the action and the change really start to happen. We also built in accountability partners, so we asked people to partner up with someone in their cohort, meet with them between each Taking Action module. I would say probably 35% of people met a whole bunch of times, a few people didn't meet at all, and a bunch of other people maybe met once or twice. So again, it's an opportunity that you present to people, and there were people who participated who did absolutely everything we put in front of them and others who did sort of the minimum, but overall, people were definitely thinking about it. So I'm happy to share more about the Taking Action modules if that's something that you and your organization are thinking about or want more information about after the webinar. I'm going to pass you back over to Jim.
Okay, terrific. Thanks, Melanie. This really is an important area to continue and build on further the Extraordinary Leader work. Well, the last couple of last comments here, we've taken a quick skip across the icebergs, had a little bit of a technical glitches along the way. Appreciate everybody hanging in with those. And we've covered very quickly now these 7 areas. As I said earlier, we will do a follow-up to you with links to lots more information. There are actually other webinars, lots more material if this is an area, any of these areas you want to dig down deeper into. Last couple of things I'll mention before we go back to Melanie for final reflections and key learnings is we have 2 public sessions coming up in the Toronto area in the end of January. We don't do public sessions very often. Most times this process is rolled out, as Melanie's been describing it, inside organizations. But this is one way. In fact, I think it was one of the first steps that Melanie and her leader took in first getting acquainted with the Extraordinary Leader. So it's a good time to do that, excellent way to do it. So you see the dates there, January 27th and then the 28th. You don't need to do both of these together. They are independent of each other, but they also are linked together as well. So we put them back to back for anybody who might be traveling and want to attend both sessions together. So we'll turn things over now to Melanie for final reflections.
We thought we'd close off this webinar by sharing some of the insights and reflections as an organization that has invested a lot of time and energy and money into a program in terms of takeaways that we hope will be helpful for you if you're considering going down this path. The first bullet you'll see listed here was a quote that came from one of our participants. So this program is very valuable in keeping morale and motivation up in difficult times. And the next sentence is the most important part. For the first time in a long time, I felt like the organization was investing in me because there was a recognition of the value of the university's leaders. And I think that was an outcome that we didn't anticipate, but we heard that time and time and time again. And so it feels like a big investment, but the impact of that investment really goes a long way for engagement and success as an organization. The other thing, a couple other things I will say, the manager's role in working with their direct reports through this process is really, really, really important. We didn't talk about that a lot today in the development or in this webinar, but I think if you're considering this program, you really need to think about how are we going to engage managers. For us, we chose to cascade it down, so then when I participated, my managers already participated and is speaking the language, understands cross-training, understands strengths and fatal flaws, and understands what the program is all about. That worked really well for us. The other thing I will say is that even for those people who weren't very engaged in the process, or, you know, there's going to be people who don't necessarily buy in, even for those folks, I still hear them, you know, a year and a half, 2 years later, saying, well, I was thinking about the 360 and the results I got, and so it's top of mind for people, even if they're not, you know, don't have action items well laid out and planned, it's still driving behavior. The other thing I will say, if we were to start again and do it all over again, I would figure out a way to build in more coaching into the program. I think there are organizations out there that have trained, you know, a team of people to be extraordinary leader coaches, because the one-on-one conversations that you can have with people around their development planning, because it is so individualized, is really, really critical. So if you're just starting on this journey, I think thinking about that really intentionally could make a big difference. And the other thing is the follow-up and the ongoing dialogue. If we had just done the one day and that was the end of this program, I mean, there would be a small handful of people who would take it and run with it and be really excited about it. But the follow-up, you know, the program was basically 6.5 months for each participant, and if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have seen nearly the results that we've seen going through the program for sure. I will say, absolutely feel free to connect with me through LinkedIn. Or through the Clemmer group if you have questions about how we did it, what we did, anything that we've spoken of today. You can probably tell I'm passionate about this program, and it's been a big project for me, and love to speak to it. So I'll just turn it back over to Jim for a few final reflections, and then we can move to questions.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Melanie. One of the things, I'll just build on one point that Melanie made that I should have mentioned earlier, is an option besides running it internally, as Laurier has done, or the public workshop, is we are doing more one-on-one coaching now, which actually is working remarkably well even by telephone. And that, when you saw the comment from Alan Harrison earlier at Queen's, there was a couple of executives, Alan and a few others, who have done that one-on-one coaching approach and with me, and we've had a few others doing a similar kind of thing. So that is an option to just have an individual or a couple of individuals go through the process rather than doing it in a larger group, as we've been talking about here. So there are a number of questions that have come in. They're very specific to, of course, our topic today is how Laurier is using this process. So there are a number of questions directed to Laurier and to Melanie. So I'm going to turn things back over to Melanie and maybe have you repeat, since we don't have two mics here, I'll have you repeat the question and then answer it as well.
Okay, so some of the questions. The first one was, or is, were the 170 leaders from both academic and administrative leadership? That is an excellent question in the university environment. We started out inviting our deans to participate, and our VP academic did participate as well. This program was mandatory on the administrative side, and it was not mandatory on the academic side. So no, it was out of the 170, I think we had 5 from the academic side. Having said that, Zenger-Folkman, since we started this program, after we started the program, has released an academic version of the 360 assessment. I think if that had been available when we started the program, we'd be in a very different place right now. So if you are from a university, I would encourage you to look at both the academic and administrative versions of the survey. So that was the first question. The second question was, did you find focusing on strengths created a much stronger morale for staff to work on improving their strengths. Absolutely, without a doubt, 100%. When people can focus on something they're good at, typically if you're good at it, you probably enjoy it as well. And so that really creates the motivation and interest in focusing on it, because now I'm given sort of permission to focus on what I love to do and what I'm good at. So absolutely, huge difference with this program is that strengths-based approach. Another quick question, how long does each taking action module take? Each one is between 2 and 3 hours. I would say you can structure these however you want. You could do it in an hour, you could do a full day. It depends on how much content there is. One thing, if you are a learning professional listening to this, that's very different about this program is that it's not, typically when we design a learning program, we say, okay, what skill do we want to teach people? We want to teach people strategic thinking. So let's do a day session on strategic thinking. Well, in this program, you're not teaching people how to be leaders of change or how to be, set strategy and direction or focus on results. You're really helping people do discovery of their own strengths and how they're going to make that look. So it is a bit of a different approach, and it took us a long time to figure out how to structure things to make it work, because not everybody is working on the same competency or working on the same skill that they're trying to become better at. Hopefully that answers your question. And the last question we have here is, Melanie, did you assign accountability partners? We did not. We let the accountability partners come about organically. We basically said, find someone in the room that you feel comfortable with, that you would like to continue this dialogue with. I mean, there may be benefit in assigning accountability partners, but for us, we felt it worked well to just leave it up to the individuals. The other thing I will say is afterwards, we did launch a mentorship program as a sort of next step with the Extraordinary Leader Program or our leadership development program, where we aligned or matched people who are looking to strengthen a specific strength with someone who's already at the 90th percentile or deemed to be extraordinary in that area, which seems to be working really, really well. So that's another way to build in the peer coaching and the follow-up through a formal mentorship program. So I believe that answers everyone's questions, and I'll just pass it back to Jim, and thank you for participating today.
All right, terrific. Well, yes, I really appreciate, Melanie, you joining us and sharing your experiences here. It has been, I hope you found that it's very valuable to have this sort of quick overview of some concepts and then some real good application. And of course, certainly what Laurier has been doing has been outstanding work at taking this a little bit further and applying it further. So Melanie has offered to connect with you on LinkedIn. If you do have any other kinds of questions, either for her or for me, we'll be happy to, in our follow-up survey with the links that were promised, be happy to address those. And I'll close with one last comment here, one last reflection from Peter Drucker, who, of course, left behind quite a legacy and was seen by many as being the original father of modern management. Drucker made the comment that making strengths productive is key to being an effective executive, that those are the true opportunities to make those productive, and that we really can't overcome weaknesses, but we can, well, I guess we can overcome weaknesses, but really what he's saying here is that we want to make them irrelevant as possible. And so we do that by feeding the opportunities and by starving the problems. There was one more question I'm seeing here that came in, and it was, does it reoccur every year? That was a question for Melanie, so let her address that.
Sorry for the last-minute ad here. Someone was asking, now that we're through the program and sort of the 170 leaders have been through it, does it recur every year? So we do have a cohort that goes through annually that captures new leaders who've joined our organization. One word of caution around new leaders is at the very beginning we did have a couple people participate who'd only been at Laurier for 2 or 3 months. I would say a good best practice is people should be in their roles for at least 12 months before they participate. And so we do run an annual cohort through the program to make sure that anybody new is becoming accustomed to the language and understanding the program from there.
Okay. Thanks very much. Well, thank you all for joining us. And a couple of you stayed on. In fact, quite a number of you stayed on here for our last few minutes. And we will be in touch. Thanks again.